One summer morning, I packed a small bag and boarded the bus to my grandfather's village. The city had become too loud, too crowded, and my heart longed for something quieter, something simpler. The ride was long, winding through fields and narrow roads, but as soon as I stepped off at the dusty little stop, I felt lighter. The air smelled of earth and wildflowers, and the sun glowed warmer here, more forgiving. My grandfather's house stood at the edge of the village, a modest old structure with vines climbing its walls and a wooden gate that creaked when I pushed it open. He greeted me with a warm smile and a firm hug, his weathered hands rough yet comforting. "You look tired," he said, studying my face. I laughed softly. "That's why I'm here." The days began to fall into a slow rhythm. I woke to the sound of roosters, helped my grandfather in his vegetable garden, and wandered down the dusty lanes to watch the farmers at work. The villagers were kind, always nodding as I passed, but kept to themselves. The quiet was refreshing, but also a little lonely. It was on my third day that I noticed him. Across the fields, a young shepherd moved gracefully among a flock of sheep, guiding them with a long staff. Even from a distance, there was something striking about him, his posture confident, his movements almost poetic. He wore a simple white shirt rolled to the elbows, and the wind tousled his dark hair as he worked. I couldn't see his face clearly, but it didn't matter. Something about him caught my attention and held it. Later that afternoon, while exploring a path near the woods, I strayed too far and realized I no longer recognized where I was. My heartbeat quickened as I spun around, trying to retrace my steps. Then a voice, low and calm, called out behind me. "You seem lost." I turned to find the shepherd standing there, his eyes as dark as the forest behind him and his smile easy, almost teasing. He was closer now, and I could see the sharp angles of his face, the faint dimple in his cheek. For a moment, I forgot how to speak. Yes, I managed, embarrassed. He nodded toward a narrow path. "This way," he said. "I'll show you." We walked side by side, and though he didn't say much, his quiet presence felt oddly reassuring. When we reached the edge of the village, he paused. "Be careful," he said, his gaze lingering on me a little longer than necessary before he turned back toward the forest. That night, over dinner, I asked my grandfather about him. The old man's face darkened slightly. "That boy," he muttered. "Don't let his charm fool you. He has a way of breaking hearts." I didn't sleep well. His words echoed in my mind, but so did the shepherd's steady eyes and quiet smile. And the next morning when I stepped outside, there he was, waiting by the path to the forest. This time, he said nothing, only tilted his head in silent invitation. The forest greeted us with the cool scent of pine and the sound of wind rustling through leaves. As I followed the shepherd down a narrow, sun-dappled trail, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, but his calm stride and occasional glance over his shoulder reassured me. He walked ahead, his staff tapping against the stones, and occasionally slowed so I could catch up. "Most people never come this deep," he remarked softly, without turning. "But it's where the real beauty lives." I didn't answer at first, too entranced by the surroundings. Wildflowers bloomed in vivid colors on either side of the path, yellows, purples, whites, and the canopy of trees above filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. It was as if we had stepped into another world, one untouched by the weight of expectations and the noise of daily life. When we reached a small clearing, he stopped and gestured for me to sit on a fallen log. A stream trickled nearby, its surface sparkling like glass. He leaned his staff against a tree and sat beside me, though not too close. For a while, neither of us spoke. He plucked a blade of grass and twisted it between his fingers, his eyes fixed on the water. Then, without looking at me, he said, "You don't belong here. This place is too quiet for someone like you." I frowned, unsure whether to feel insulted or flattered. "And what makes you think you know me?" I countered. That earned a faint smile from him, just enough to reveal a dimple in his cheek. "I watch," he replied simply. "I notice things." His words hung in the air, intimate and disarming. My cheeks warmed as I looked away, pretending to study the flowers. But inside, my heart was beating faster than it should have. He reached over and plucked a delicate white blossom from the ground, then tucked it gently behind my ear. His fingers brushed my skin lightly, and the simple gesture sent a quiet thrill through me. "Better," he murmured. We spent hours there, talking in low voices about little things, how he had grown up herding sheep, how I missed the city and yet didn't miss it at all. At one point, he asked about my dreams, and I found myself telling him things I hadn't even shared with my closest friends. The more he listened, the more I felt seen, as though every word I spoke mattered to him. And when our eyes met, I caught something in his gaze, soft, yet intense, that made it hard to breathe. As the sun began to sink behind the trees, he stood and offered his hand to help me up. "Come again tomorrow," he said quietly, his thumb brushing over my knuckles before he let go. "There's more I want to show you." I nodded, though my heart already knew. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The following days became a blur of stolen hours and secret smiles. Every morning, after helping my grandfather with chores, I would find an excuse to wander toward the edge of the forest. And every morning, without fail, he was there, leaning casually against a tree, staff in hand, waiting for me. We explored deeper each time, venturing into parts of the woods so quiet and secluded it felt as if the world outside had ceased to exist. He showed me hidden streams, old stone ruins half swallowed by ivy, and meadows that opened suddenly in golden light. Every place seemed more beautiful because he was there, walking just ahead, sometimes glancing back with that knowing smile. We grew bolder, too. On one of those mornings, he reached for my hand as we crossed a narrow footbridge, his fingers lacing through mine. I didn't pull away. Instead, I held tighter, savoring the warmth of his touch, the quiet strength of it. Under the shade of towering oaks, he would tell me stories, some about the village, some about the stars, and I would listen, completely enraptured. Sometimes he would stop mid-sentence, fix his dark eyes on mine, and say something so simple yet disarming that my heart would skip. "You belong here more than you think," or "I've never met anyone like you." One afternoon, as we rested in a sunlit clearing, he gently cupped my cheek and whispered, "You're all I see now." Then he leaned closer, his lips brushing against my hair, his breath warm against my skin. My eyes fluttered shut. By then I was convinced that he felt what I felt, that our quiet walks and tender words meant something real. But the following days shattered that illusion. I decided to surprise him. He hadn't noticed me yet as I approached the usual meeting spot, so I slowed my steps and hid behind the cover of a tree. That's when I saw him, already there, leaning against a tree just like always. But he wasn't alone. A girl stood before him, laughing softly as he twirled a wildflower between his fingers. The same flower he'd tucked behind my ear days ago. He tucked it behind hers now, his hands lingering on her face the way they had lingered on mine. My breath caught in my throat, but no sound came out. I watched as he leaned down, murmuring something I couldn't hear, before pressing his lips to her cheek in the same casual, intimate way he'd touched me. I stood frozen, heart cracking like thin ice beneath heavy boots. The truth was undeniable. His charm was never mine alone. As their laughter drifted through the clearing, I turned and slipped away, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. And though my feet carried me quickly back toward the village, part of me remained there, among the trees, where his betrayal bloomed as painfully as his whispered promises once had. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling beams of my grandfather's house. The silence of the village, once soothing, now pressed heavy on my chest. I replayed the scene over and over. The wildflower, her laughter, his easy smile, and each time, it cut deeper. By morning, my pillow was damp, my eyes swollen, but my resolve had hardened. At breakfast, my grandfather glanced at me with quiet concern. "You seem different," he remarked. I forced a small smile, though I didn't answer. How could I tell him I'd let myself believe in something that was never real? That his warning had come too late? The shepherd was at his usual place that day, leaning casually by the forest's edge. but I didn't stop. I walked past him without a word, without even a glance. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the faintest flicker of surprise in his expression, as though he hadn't expected me to see through him so soon. That afternoon, I spent my time in the garden, pulling weeds alongside my grandfather. The repetitive work grounded me, the soil cool between my fingers, the sun warm on my shoulders. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt present, aware of who I was and what I deserved. Still, as the days passed, I caught glimpses of him sometimes, leading his flock across the hills or laughing with someone else by the well. Each sighting brought a pang, but it dulled a little more each time. On my last morning in the village, I woke early and walked to the forest one final time. The path was empty, quiet but alive with the rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of a stream. The clearing where we'd spent hours together seemed smaller now, less enchanted, as if my heartbreak had stripped away its magic. I stood there for a while, letting the breeze tangle my hair, letting the memories settle into something less sharp. I thought of his soft words and warm hands, of how easily he'd made me feel special, and of how quickly he'd given the same to someone else. And then I let it go. As I turned to leave, I whispered a quiet farewell to the forest, to him, to the version of myself who'd believed in his empty promises. Back at the house, my grandfather was waiting with my packed bag. As we said goodbye, he gave my hand a gentle squeeze and said simply, "Some lessons are learned only when they hurt." I nodded, a faint smile tugging at my lips. On the bus back to the city, I watched the fields and trees blur by. I knew now that love wasn't about pretty words or fleeting glances. It was about truth. And though my heart still ached, I felt lighter somehow, knowing I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. Ahead of me lay a whole world waiting to be discovered. And next time, I promised myself I'd walk into it with my eyes wide open.